Welcome to Socials with the Saints. This is a special opportunity to take a break from your daily routine and meet someone who can teach, encourage, and inspire us. I personally have heard this person's name throughout my life, but knew little about him and his personality. His story can help us better understand how to face our situations today with grace and courage. Despite being bullied for years of his life, he lived with a joy and a peace that continues to draw people to him to this day. His name was Gerardo Maiella. In English, we call him Gerard. Gerard was born April 23rd, 1725 in southern Italy. Since his earliest days, he was frail and suffered from poor health. And while he was contemplative by nature, Gerard also had a great deal of wit and gusto. I'm going to start off with a story that I know sounds quite unbelievable, but to be honest, Gerard's life is so chock full of these types of remarkable or unexplainable stories that I can't help but wonder if we could all use a healthy dose of the childlike trust in God that Gerard clearly had. From the age of about 5 years old, he liked visiting the local church and would return home from these visits, handing his mother a loaf of bread. When asked who gave him the bread, Gerard would reply that a most beautiful boy at church gives it to me. To investigate this curious response, his sister followed him. To her complete astonishment, upon Gerard's arrival to the church, the statue of the Christ child came to life, jumped out of his mother's arms, and proceeded to play with Gerard. After some time, little Jesus would hand Gerard the bread and return to the arms of the Virgin Mary as before. Gerard loved Jesus. Because of his poor health, he appeared quite younger than his age, and so when he went up to receive his first communion, the priest passed over him. Gerard ran off in tears. There are a couple other miraculous stories related to this, and I would like to invite you to read about them in the pamphlet that we have for you to download from our website. Gerard formally received First Communion at age 10 and continued to receive it as often as possible. When he was 12, Gerard's father passed away. He had been a tailor, and so to help support his mother and 3 sisters, Gerard apprenticed with another tailor. Unfortunately, the tailor's foreman regularly abused Gerard, verbally and physically. Gerard forgave him in the name of Jesus. Eventually, the man was fired. Gerard's next job was at 16 years old in the household of the local bishop. Apparently, the bishop was not cruel, but he did have a temper. So one day when Gerard accidentally drops the bishop's house key down the water well, poor Gerard was quite worried. After praying about what to do, he went and got the statue of the child Jesus, tied a rope around the statue's waist, and sent Jesus down the well, asking him to retrieve the key. As he drew him up again, there in little Jesus' hand was the key. After the bishop passed away, Gerard worked a couple of other jobs. He would divide up his earnings like this: 1/3 for the poor, 1/3 for the family, and 1/3 to offer to the church to ask that the priest would offer mass for people who had died and were in purgatory. So as you can tell, he was extremely pious. Gerard also embraced several bodily sacrifices, such as fasting on only bread and wearing a coarse shirt under his clothing. People in those days would take on physical disciplines like this as a reminder to practice spiritual virtues. Gerard so wanted to be like Jesus that he went to extremes at times, such as trying to imitate the feeling of crucifixion by binding himself to a wooden beam and inhaling smoke from burning rags. Thankfully, someone found him that time before it was too late. You might imagine his mother often wept to see her already frail son suffer from such practices. Well, at age 20, Gerard had a job tailoring the clothes of wealthy students who insulted him and even hit him. His boss sometimes whipped him. Even children in the street would bully him, throwing rocks at him or tying him up with cords and dragging him around. But he never held a grudge against his bullies or abusers. He prayed for them. Gerard's personal life goal was to live like Jesus in a radical way. He tried to do this by applying to join the Capuchin Franciscan friars, but because of his bad health, they didn't accept him. Well, one very important day, Gerard passed by a group of Redemptorists. Redemptorists are men belonging to a religious order founded by Saint Alphonsus Liguori, who was living at this time. Their mission is to bring the gospel to the poor and the most abandoned people. I've heard of them described kind of like the Marines of the Catholic Church because their mission is to go anywhere for God. Well, Gerard eagerly inquired about joining them, but they told him that their rigorous way of life would be too much for him. However, the following year, they came and conducted a type of faith revival event called a mission, there where Gerard lived, and he again begged several times to join them. His mother was beside herself at the thought of her only son leaving the household, and the family even locked him in his room. However, he escaped out the window, leaving them a note that read, "I am going to become a saint. Think no more of me." So he went and caught up with the Redemptorists who had left town. He finally convinced them to give him a chance. The superior sent him to go to their house in Iliceto, carrying a letter that read, "I am sending you a useless brother." But Gerard beat all expectations, and the brothers praised his virtue and dedication to work. He was a gardener and then helped with the items needed for Mass as a sacristan. Gerard professed his final vows as a Redemptorist brother on July 16, 1752, to poverty, chastity, obedience to his superiors, and a vow of perseverance, which was unique to the Redemptorists because of their demanding lifestyle. Now, at this time, the brothers were remarkably poor, and they put Gerard to the work of asking benefactors for assistance. Because of his personality and upstanding character, he was successful. But here's a story that might seem counterintuitive. Gerard also once gave away all the brothers' bread to the poor. Another brother confronted him, appalled about this, and the two went to their superior. Gerard said, "God will provide. Let's go and see. Perhaps there's still some left." The other brother assured the superior that there was most certainly not a single morsel left. But when they opened the cupboards, it was completely filled with bread. Gerard ran to the church to give thanks to God, while the other two men stood amazed. Well, 2 years after he had made his vows, a young woman in town began to gossip about Gerard, going so far as to report that he had fathered a child. When his superiors questioned Gerard, he only replied that God knew the truth. He returned to his room and carved in the doorpost, "Here the will of God is done, as God wills, as long as God wills." He was ordered to remain at the monastery, was not allowed to participate in ministry, and was denied Holy Communion. Yet, Gerard was at peace. The brothers wondered, was he guilty? Did he have no conscience? After 3 months, the young woman confessed that she had lied. Her name was Neria, and she'd come from a poor family. Gerard had helped her raise enough money to enter the convent, which was similar to a dowry at that time. She, however, had become homesick and left religious life, and had taken out her embarrassment and upset feelings on Gerard. Alphonsus Liguori, the Redemptorist founder, asked Gerard why he hadn't defended himself all this time. Gerard picked up the Redemptorist rule of life and pointed to the section instructing that if falsely accused, a Redemptorist is not to defend himself. Gerard had trusted that God would make the truth known and had prayed for his accuser. Alphonsus, who, in addition to founding the Redemptorists, was a moral theologian and a former lawyer, well, he would go on to say that Gerard was a better Redemptorist than himself. He said, "Brother Gerard is a saint." And yes, Gerard did all those pious saint things that saints from his time did, like sleeping on the bare floor only a couple hours at night, intense fasting, and eating bitter herbs as penance. Until recently, all Redemptorists were to beat themselves with cords once a week as a way to discipline their senses. Gerard would often do so until he bled. And if I stopped there, you might have trouble believing that this man was a real human being, but he was. More recent research has found that Brother Gerard liked to play practical jokes, and his wit and humor actually drew people of all vocations to want to spend time with him. Gerard's wit was evident in how he lived the vow of obedience, to a fault. For example, when instructed to not ride the donkey into town, Gerard would walk the donkey into town and then ride it back home. Or when a representative of a duchess once came and announced that she wished to see Brother Gerard, he replied, "I'm afraid that I cannot bring you to that brother. To tell you the truth, he is only a simpleton and a fool. People, as I find, are strangely mistaken about him here at Naples. Please tell the Duchess so for me." Well, this Duchess went herself to find Gerard at the church and begged him to cure her sick child. Gerard pointed to the tabernacle and said, "There dwells the giver of all good gifts." He promised to pray for her, and the Duchess was still in the church when her maidservant came in to report that the child had regained health. During Redemptorist missions, those local revival events I mentioned earlier, Gerard's job was to help prepare people for the experience of going to confession. He was actually a spiritual director and conducted a ministry of spiritual direction, especially for nuns, corresponding with them and preaching to them. At least 3 convents were reformed in their spiritual life under his care. This fact is quite extraordinary, given that Gerard was not a priest. Yet, due to his character, he was given the necessary permissions for this ministry. Priests themselves would also consult Gerard for spiritual direction. Here's an excerpt from among his many letters. "There is no need to dwell on the surface of daily events, but rather to scrutinize them with the eyes of faith. The project and the loving presence of God are real, even beneath the crust of events that at first glance seem to be harsh. When we see that," Gerard said, "it is possible to live always in serenity, knowing well that in God's plan lies our happiness and fulfillment." Gerard, having grown up in a household of women, showed a great and special concern for women and girls. Once, as he was leaving the house of a family he visited, one of the daughters ran after him to let him know that he dropped his handkerchief. "Keep it," he told her. "It will be useful to you someday." Years later, that same woman found herself in a difficult pregnancy and complicated childbirth. She remembered his words and requested Brother Gerard's handkerchief. Her pain immediately ceased, and the baby was born healthy. That is why, since then, he has been known as the patron saint of expectant mothers. Gerard died of tuberculosis at the age of 30. Countless miracles are attributed to his prayerful intercession, and many people have been inspired by his courageous charity, his bold forgiveness, and his radical love for Jesus and concern for the poor and most abandoned. I invite you to continue this social with the saints by listening to the audio discussion about how Saint Gerard Maiella can help us in the ups and downs of our daily lives, as well as download a biographical pamphlet and cards with his inspiring quotations, all available on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Thank you for joining me to meet Saint Gerard Maiella. I hope that he continues to inspire and encourage you. Know that in your journey, you are never alone in the communion of saints.